The phone vibrated at 3 a.m., the screen glowing with a missed call, and Emily whispered, "Why now, Daniel? Why at this hour?" Her chest ached as silence filled the room like an unwelcome ghost. She stared at the dim light, hoping it might ring again, but it stayed dark, cruel in its stillness. Emily said, "You promised me no more surprises," yet the weight of the unanswered call pressed on her ribs. Every second stretched into hours, her thoughts running wild. Was Daniel safe? Or was he somewhere he shouldn't be? The words he left unsaid screamed louder than any excuse. She clutched the phone, her knuckles pale, wishing the distance could shrink just for tonight. Memories of his laughter came rushing back, making the silence sharper, like a blade across her chest. Emily said, "I can't breathe when you disappear like this." The clock ticked mercilessly, the minutes dragging her deeper into fear. A faint hope whispered he might call again, but dread told her it was already too late. Emily sat by the window, dawn's pale light seeping through curtains, her body heavy from a sleepless night. She replayed the moment again, whispering, "Why, Daniel? Why always when I'm weakest?" Her reflection looked hollow, as though grief had stolen her youth. She thought of his last words, so casual, "I'll call you later," as if promises cost nothing. Emily said, "I believed you every time, but belief feels like a wound now." The world outside carried on, indifferent to her collapse, cars humming past, birds singing in cruel normalcy. She remembered when Daniel's calls were laughter, when his voice wrapped her like a blanket, and wondered if she imagined those nights. Emily said, "If love can cross oceans, why can't it cross silence?" Her hands trembled against the glass as though she could touch his world through it. The ache in her chest spread until it filled the entire room, leaving her stranded with unanswered questions. Emily held her coffee mug, steam rising as her hands shook, the bitter taste grounding her in a world that felt unreal. She muttered, "Daniel, you promised to steady me, but you've become the storm." She remembered nights when his voice came through headphones like warmth in winter. "I warm." Now it was only static, silence, and excuses. Her phone sat on the table, a silent witness to her unraveling. She whispered, "Do you ever think of me at all, or am I just another task you postpone?" Each unanswered message echoed louder than his words ever had. She tried to tell herself it was work, time zones, pressure, but her gut screamed otherwise. The memory of Daniel's laugh hurt more than his silence now. She said, "I am holding on with both hands, and you don't even notice." Tears blurred the mug in her grasp until it became just weight in her palms. The day dragged on, but Emily's heart never left the night before. She said, "Every clock I see feels like a knife now." At work, her co-workers laughed and planned, their lives stitched with presents. Hers was sewn with absences. She scrolled through old messages, Daniel's words glowing like ghosts. Promises of visits. "Soon, Emily, I swear," all piling into lies. She whispered, "You build castles of words, and then leave me standing in ruins." The screen blurred as her eyes brimmed, but she refused to let the tears fall in front of anyone. Every vibration from her phone jolted her, only to find empty notifications. Silence was crueler than rejection. It left her stranded with her imagination. She asked herself if hope was love, or simply a curse. Emily said, "I believed your excuses, Daniel, but belief is killing me." Night returned, and with it, the fear of another unanswered call. Emily sat curled on her bed, whispering, "Daniel, please. Just once tonight. Tell me I'm not invisible." The shadows around her thickened, pressing on her chest like walls closing in. She thought of when his voice had been her anchor, steadying her through storms. Now his absence dragged her deeper than waves ever could. The silence grew into a monster, feeding on her hope until it trembled like a candle in wind. She said, "I don't know if I'm waiting for you or wasting myself." The phone lay beside her, its screen black, a mirror of her loneliness. Every second stretched wide, every breath harder to draw. She whispered, "If love is real, Daniel, why does it feel like drowning?" and pressed her hand against her heart as though she could hold it together. Emily sat cross-legged on her bed, letters scattered around her like fallen leaves, each one Daniel had written during their first year apart. She whispered, "I held on to every word, Daniel, because they felt like proof." Her chest tightened as she remembered nights she reread them under dim lamps, convincing herself that love could survive oceans. She thought of his handwriting, bold strokes that once made her feel chosen. Now those same words felt like anchors pulling her down. Emily said, "I carried you in every empty room, in every silence, in every prayer." Her phone buzzed faintly, only an app notification, and she laughed bitterly at her own desperation. Every memory of Daniel's affection sharpened the ache of his absence. Emily said, "Do you even remember writing these promises, or were they just words you tossed away?" She pressed one letter to her chest, tears staining the ink, afraid that what she believed was real was only an illusion. At the cafe down the street, Emily sat alone at a corner table, waiting for her friend Sarah. The air smelled of roasted coffee and cinnamon, but her thoughts were bitter. She stared at the empty chair and muttered, "Daniel, you should be here, not across oceans." When Sarah finally arrived, smiling kindly, Emily forced a fragile smile back. Sarah said, "You can't keep waiting like this, Em. He isn't giving you what you deserve." Emily's heart twisted, because she knew Sarah was right. She whispered, "I keep telling myself it's just the distance. But what if it's him?" Sarah placed her hand on hers, grounding her, eyes full of pity. Emily said, "I don't want pity. I want proof he still loves me." The cafe buzzed with laughter, but for Emily, the sound was a reminder of everything missing from her life. She sipped her coffee, its warmth failing to thaw her frozen heart. Emily returned home, Sarah's words echoing in her ears like a warning bell she didn't want to hear. She said, "I've built my life around Daniel, but maybe he doesn't even see me anymore." She paced the room, phone in hand, rereading old chats. Each "I miss you" felt more like a ghost than a promise. She whispered, "You said love could conquer time zones, but why do I feel conquered by them instead?" Her reflection in the mirror showed a tired face, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. Emily said, "I've sacrificed so much, Daniel, but what have you sacrificed for me?" She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, trying to breathe past the ache. Outside, children laughed as they played, and Emily envied their unbroken joy. The silence of her apartment grew heavier, a suffocating reminder that love should not feel this lonely. Later that night, Emily lay on her bed, scrolling through pictures of Daniel, laughing in sunny places she couldn't reach. She whispered, "How can you smile so easily while I break apart?" The distance between them felt like an ocean she was drowning in. She remembered nights when his voice was her lifeline, and now even a single text felt like a miracle. Emily said, "I told myself patience was love, but maybe it's just another name for denial." The glow of the screen cast shadows across her face, highlighting her red eyes. She thought about calling him again, but stopped herself, fearing silence more than rejection. Emily said, "Do you even think of me when you laugh with them?" Her chest rose sharply, anger and sorrow twisting together. The night stretched long, and she realized she was falling asleep with tears more often than with comfort. The next morning, Emily stood before her parents at the breakfast table, their disapproving silence louder than any words. Her mother said, "Emily, this waiting isn't a life. You're fading away." Her father frowned, eyes heavy with worry, and Emily clenched her fists under the table. She whispered, "You don't understand. Daniel is my life." Her mother sighed, shaking her head, while her father said, "He isn't here, and that matters." The toast on her plate grew cold, untouched as her throat tightened. Emily thought of how her family's concern felt like chains pulling her away from him. She said, "I've already given up so much, I can't let go of him too." The clinking of cutlery felt deafening in the strained air. Emily forced a smile, but her parents saw right through it, and she realized love was pulling her apart from every direction. It had been weeks since the last call. Emily sat on her couch, phone in hand, staring at the screen with a sinking heart. No messages, no missed calls. She whispered, "This isn't how love should feel." It had been months since their last visit. When he'd left, Daniel had promised to come back soon, but soon had turned into endless days and nights of waiting. Emily thought about the empty evenings she spent staring at the phone, wondering if it was just her love that was fading. She sighed deeply. "Maybe I was never enough for you, Daniel." She could hear his excuses in her mind. Work is crazy, the time zone is tough, but none of them felt real anymore. The more she thought about it, the harder it was to hold on. She tried calling him again, but it went straight to voicemail. Emily said, "I thought love was worth waiting for, but this is just silence." Her fingers hovered over the screen, unsure if she should leave a message or just let it be. Emily woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing. It wasn't from Daniel. Her heart sank as she read the message. A friend had posted a photo of Daniel, smiling in some tropical city. She whispered, "Why am I always the last to know?" The jealousy twisted in her chest like a knot. Was he truly happy without her? Emily pulled the blanket over her head and muttered, "I should be happy for him, but all I feel is anger." She thought about the last few months of uncertainty, the broken promises, and her unanswered questions. He had said he would call. He had promised that he would visit. The days dragged on. Emily asked herself, "What am I holding on to?" She clicked on the image of Daniel and his new friends, smiling in places she didn't recognize. Her fingers trembled as she closed the app, not wanting to see anymore. She muttered, "I don't know how much longer I can do this." The day felt like a blur of disappointment. Emily sat with Sarah at lunch, but her mind was elsewhere. She stared at her plate, not hungry. Sarah said, "You can't keep doing this to yourself." Emily replied, "What choice do I have? He doesn't even see how much this hurts." She thought of Daniel, of how his absence filled every corner of her life, yet he seemed so unbothered. Emily said, "I don't even know who I'm fighting for anymore." Sarah took a deep breath and said, "You need to stop waiting for someone who isn't showing up." Emily's heart twisted. She didn't want to hear this, but she knew it was true. Her hope was beginning to crumble under the weight of all the silence. Emily's eyes stung with tears. She looked at Sarah and whispered, "What if I let go and he's just gone forever?" Later that evening, Emily stood by the window, staring out at the city below. She said, "I used to imagine us here together." The thought of their future, once so clear in her mind, now seemed like a distant dream. She remembered when they had talked about living together, of trips they would take, the life they would build. Now, all she had were faded memories. Emily whispered, "I don't want to be alone anymore." She stared at her phone again, hoping for a sign that Daniel was still there. She tried to tell herself she was being dramatic, that it was just a phase, but the silence was growing unbearable. Emily said, "This silence is louder than any fight we ever had." She wished she could rewind time to the days when their calls were filled with laughter and love. Instead, all she had now were empty promises. That night, Emily sat by the phone, waiting for it to ring. She said, "I can't wait for this any longer." She had been holding on to hope for so long, but now it felt like she was drowning in it. The messages she had sent to Daniel over the past weeks were left unanswered, each one weighing heavier than the last. Emily whispered, "I gave you everything, Daniel, but I don't think you're giving me anything back." She thought of all the nights she spent crying in the dark, telling herself he was worth it. She had convinced herself that love could survive distance. But now, she wasn't sure anymore. Emily said, "I can't keep waiting for someone who's not here." She knew deep down that something had to change. The pain of loving someone who didn't seem to care anymore was unbearable. The phone stayed silent. Emily sat in her living room, phone in hand, eyes glued to the screen. The message from Daniel finally appeared, but it wasn't what she expected. It read, "I need to tell you something. I'm sorry." Her heart dropped. The fear that had been sitting in her chest for weeks exploded. She whispered, "What have you done, Daniel?" Every ounce of hope she'd clung to felt like a lie in the face of this message. The silence had already eaten away at her trust, but this was something different. Emily's fingers shook as she typed back. "What's going on? Why didn't you call me?" Her stomach twisted as her phone buzzed again, but when she saw the words, she felt like she'd been hit with 1,000 arrows. "There's someone else." The words were a dagger through her chest. Daniel had never mentioned anyone else, never alluded to another relationship, and yet here they were. She whispered, "I never saw this coming, Daniel." Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away, afraid to let them fall in front of the screen. Emily's hands trembled as she stared at the phone, the message burning in her mind. Her heart was racing, her breaths shallow. "How could you do this to me, Daniel?" she thought. Her mind replayed every conversation, every promise he'd made to her. The disbelief was suffocating. She had convinced herself that no one could come between them, that love could bridge the distance. But now, that distance felt infinite. Emily stood up, pacing around the room, trying to make sense of it all. Her thoughts spiraled out of control. Who is she? The question gnawed at her insides. How long has this been going on? She stared at the phone, hoping he would answer, hoping that it was a mistake, hoping that there was an explanation she could grasp. But there was nothing. No response, just the empty silence of unanswered questions. Emily whispered, "I've waited for you, Daniel. How long will you make me wait now?" Her chest felt hollow as she slumped back onto the couch, exhausted from the emotional weight she carried. Hours passed, but Emily couldn't bring herself to move from the couch. The phone remained on her lap, its silence deafening. She hadn't heard from Daniel since his last message. Her mind was on fire, a mix of rage, hurt, and disbelief. How long has this been going on? She asked herself again, her chest tightening. She couldn't understand how he could do this to her, how he could replace her without even saying goodbye. Emily thought about their last conversation, his promises to visit, his words of love. She said, "You promised me everything, Daniel, and now you've broken it all." She felt the tears threatening to spill but couldn't bring herself to cry. Instead, she reached for her phone again, her finger hovering over his contact name. Should she call him? Should she demand answers? No. He didn't deserve her desperation. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run away from everything. Instead, she stared blankly at the phone, unable to let go, even though her heart was telling her to walk away. It was the next morning when the phone buzzed again. Emily's heart leaped in her chest, hoping for a message from Daniel, but it wasn't. It was from Sarah. "Hey." The text read, "I need to talk. I know about him." Emily's blood ran cold. How much did Sarah know? She had been the one person Emily had confided in. And now she was the one holding the pieces of a story she hadn't even been able to comprehend. Her hands shook as she called Sarah, her mind running wild with questions. The conversation that followed shattered everything she thought she knew. Sarah explained how Daniel had been seeing someone else, a woman he had met months ago during his travels. Emily's world spun, each word cutting deeper than the last. The pain wasn't just from the betrayal. It was from the realization that Sarah had known before her. She felt utterly alone. Emily whispered, "Why didn't you tell me, Sarah?" Her voice cracked as she clutched the phone tighter. The world felt like it was crumbling around her. Emily sat on the floor, phone still in her hand, staring at nothing. She replayed Sarah's words over and over in her mind, as though hearing them once wasn't enough. She whispered, "How could he lie to me like this?" Every moment they shared now seemed like a facade, a performance he'd been putting on while he built a life with someone else. Emily thought of their future, the plans they'd made, and how easily they'd been erased. She said, all of it was just a lie, wasn't it? She felt a bitter laugh rise in her chest, but forced it back down. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The phone still felt heavy in her hand, as though it contained every ounce of her broken heart. Emily stood up, her legs shaking, her entire body trembling with the force of her pain. She whispered, "I can't do this anymore." The weight of the betrayal was too much to bear. The phone buzzed again. Emily didn't hesitate this time. She pressed the call button, her heart pounding in her chest. It rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. Wah. Her stomach twisted. She had been waiting for this moment, and now it felt like a battlefield. The voice that answered was shaky, distant, but still familiar. Daniel said, "Emily, I didn't know how to tell you." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She could barely breathe. She whispered, "You didn't know how to tell me. You've been lying to me for months, Daniel. How could you?" The silence between them was deafening, like a chasm too wide to cross. Emily's hands trembled as she gripped the phone, her voice shaking with anger. "You promised me," she said, her chest tight. "You promised you would come back. But you never did. Instead, you replaced me." She felt her anger bubbling to the surface, and it was all she could do to keep from screaming. "How long were you going to keep me in the dark?" Daniel's voice crackled through the phone, but Emily could barely make out the words. "It wasn't like that," he said. "I never wanted to hurt you." Emily laughed bitterly, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "You think I'm stupid, Daniel. You think I wouldn't feel it. I felt you slipping away. And now you tell me you didn't want to hurt me." The words were like acid, burning through her thoughts. "I gave you everything. I put my life on hold for you. And this is how you repay me." Her voice rose, filled with raw emotion. She said, "You don't get to walk away and pretend nothing happened. You don't get to come back and act like nothing's broken." The tears finally spilled over, but Emily didn't care. "I waited for you. I waited for someone who wasn't even there." The rage and heartbreak poured out of her like a dam breaking, but it wasn't enough. She still felt empty. She needed something from him, something more than excuses. Daniel finally spoke again, his voice softer now, as if he realized the weight of his words. "I'm sorry, I truly am, Emily. I never wanted to hurt you." Emily shook her head, as if she could physically push the apology away. "Sorry doesn't fix this," she said coldly. "Sorry doesn't change the fact that you've been lying to me. Sorry doesn't undo the pain of watching my life fall apart while you were busy living yours." Her hands clenched into fists, and her voice shook with the force of her emotions. "You said we'd be together. You promised me that nothing would tear us apart, but all you've done is tear me apart." Emily stared at the phone in her hand, feeling the weight of all the broken promises. "I don't want your sorry, Daniel. I want the truth. I want something real." Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper, as if he was afraid of what he was about to say. "There's more, Emily. There's something I need to tell you." Emily's heart skipped a beat, the air in her lungs freezing. "What else could you possibly have to say, Daniel? What more could you hide from me?" she demanded, the words tumbling out of her in a rush. She could feel her entire world starting to tilt. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was something deeper, something worse. She said, "How much more are you going to take from me before it's enough? How much more of my heart do you want?" The silence on the other end was suffocating. Emily's stomach churned with dread. She didn't know whether she wanted to hear the truth or not. "Tell me everything, Daniel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "and maybe, just maybe, I'll understand why you couldn't be honest with me from the start." The truth came out like a flood. Daniel revealed everything. He had been seeing someone else for months, someone he met during one of his trips. Emily's heart shattered with each word, each revelation. She had known something was wrong, but she had never imagined this. "I never meant for it to happen this way," Daniel said weakly, but Emily could hear the cracks in his voice. "I never wanted to hurt you, Emily, but I didn't know how to get out." The words sounded like excuses, like everything he'd said had been a lie. Emily stared at the phone, her mind numb with disbelief. "You didn't know how to get out? You could have told me the truth. You could have been honest with me, but instead, you chose to tear me apart slowly." Her voice broke. "You didn't care about me. You only cared about yourself." The phone slipped from her hand, and she collapsed onto the couch, the weight of it all too much to bear. "Goodbye, Daniel," she whispered, and the finality of the words tore at her heart. It had been 2 days since the call ended, 2 days since Emily had uttered her final goodbye to Daniel. The silence in the apartment felt heavier than it had before. The phone, now just a lifeless object, sat on the counter. She walked past it countless times, but this time it no longer held the weight of expectation. Emily stared out the window, watching the world go by, wondering how everything could still feel so still while her life had been torn apart. She whispered, "I gave you everything, Daniel, and in the end, I was nothing." She ran her fingers through her hair, feeling the ache in her chest still linger, but there was something else now, an emptiness she couldn't shake. The anger had faded, but the loss remained, sharp and cold. She had believed in him, and now she had nothing. Her voice cracked as she muttered, "What do I do now?" The world seemed to move on, but she was frozen in place, struggling to find her footing in the aftermath of everything. It wasn't until Emily sat down with Sarah again that she realized just how much she had been holding in. Sarah listened patiently, her eyes soft with concern. Emily said, "I keep thinking I should feel better. I should feel relieved, but I don't." She ran a hand through her hair, her gaze empty. "It's like I'm still waiting for something, but I don't even know what for anymore." She looked up at Sarah, searching for some kind of answer, something that would make sense of the mess she was in. Sarah said gently, "You're grieving, Em. You've lost something, not just Daniel, but the future you thought you had." Emily nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling in. "I don't know how to move on from this," she whispered. The idea of a future without him, without their plans, felt alien to her. How do you let go of someone you've built your whole world around? Later that evening, Emily stood in front of her mirror, studying her reflection. Her hair, once vibrant, now seemed dull, weighed down by the emotional exhaustion she carried. She said softly, "I don't recognize myself anymore." The girl who once believed in forever, in the power of love, seemed so far away. Now, all she felt was the aching weight of disappointment. "What happened to the person I was?" she asked the empty room. She stared at herself, wondering if she could ever trust her heart again. How do you heal from something like this? Can you ever really trust again? She took a deep breath and whispered, "I have to start over." She didn't know what that would look like or how long it would take, but she knew it was the only way forward. The next day, Emily woke up to the soft rays of the morning sun filtering through the curtains. She didn't have the energy to get up, but for the first time in days, she felt a faint glimmer of hope. She whispered, "Maybe this is what moving on feels like." She didn't know if she was ready to forgive Daniel, or even if she ever would, but she realized that the first step was learning to forgive herself. "I trusted him more than I trusted myself," she thought. Emily sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the floor, her hands in her lap. She said, "I can't change the past, but I can change how I move forward." The ache in her chest hadn't disappeared, but the fog of confusion began to lift. She finally felt like she could breathe again, even if it was just a little easier than before. The pain was still there, but it no longer felt like it was controlling her. As the days went by, Emily began to find small pieces of herself again. She met up with friends, spent time on her own, and slowly rebuilt the life she had put on hold. One evening, Sarah said, "You're different now, Em, you've changed." Emily smiled faintly. "I had to," she replied. "I wasn't living. I was just waiting." She looked out the window, her heart still sore, but lighter than it had been in months. "I don't know what the future holds," she said softly, "but I know it's mine now, and that's enough for me." Past was still there, but it no longer defined her. She had learned to let go. Emily stood up, her eyes clear and steady. "I'm stronger than I thought I was," she said, her voice full of quiet resolve. She was no longer waiting for a call that would never come. She was living for herself. It had been a month since Emily had walked away from the past. She stood on the balcony, the evening breeze brushing through her hair, a soft reminder of how far she had come. The weight of the past still lingered in her chest, but it no longer defined her. She whispered to herself, "Maybe the hardest part of love is learning to let go." The city around her was alive, people moving in and out of their lives, unaware of the quiet transformation happening within her. Emily's smile was soft but genuine now. The tears, the anger, the heartache, they were still there, but they didn't control her anymore. She had learned to let go of what wasn't hers to hold. "I don't need answers anymore," she whispered. "I don't need his apologies or explanations." The moment she'd freed herself from waiting, she felt lighter, as though 1,000 pounds had been lifted off her shoulders. "I am enough," she said, the words falling from her lips like a revelation. Later that week, Emily met Sarah at the park. Sarah looked at her with a soft smile. The kind of smile that knew things weren't perfect, but they were getting better. "You look different," Sarah said, her voice full of warmth. Emily smiled back, her eyes clear, the weight of uncertainty gone. "I feel different," Emily replied, her voice strong and steady. I think I've finally stopped waiting for someone to give me permission to be happy." The wind played with her hair as they walked down the path, the leaves rustling softly. "I spent so long trying to hold on to something that wasn't real," Emily continued. "But now, I know I'm the one who decides what my future looks like. I don't need him to validate me." She paused for a moment, letting the cool breeze settle around her. "I'm building my life, and I'm okay with it being just mine for now." A week later, Emily found herself at the edge of the pier, looking out at the ocean. The horizon stretched endlessly, just like the future she was starting to build. She closed her eyes, letting the salty air fill her lungs. She thought of Daniel, but the thought didn't hurt anymore. She had realized that sometimes love was more about what you let go of than what you hold on to. Maybe love isn't about finding someone to complete you, she thought. Maybe it's about finding peace in yourself first. She smiled softly, her heart lighter than it had been in months. "I gave him everything, but now I'm learning to give that same love to myself." The water below reflected the changing sky, just as her life was shifting, slowly but surely, into something she could finally call her own. A few days later, Emily met a stranger in the bookstore, someone who smiled at her in a way that felt familiar, yet completely new. The conversation flowed easily, and for the first time in a long time, Emily realized she wasn't waiting for anything anymore. It's funny, she thought, how life works in such unexpected ways. She had spent so much time waiting for one person to change, to make her feel whole. But now, she felt whole on her own. The stranger didn't need to complete her. He simply added to the joy she was already finding within herself. She said softly, "Maybe love isn't just in the waiting but in the living." The moment felt light, free from the weight of expectations. Emily felt the spark of possibility, of new beginnings, and realized that the best part of moving on was embracing the unknown without fear. Months later, Emily stood in front of her mirror once again, but this time she saw someone different. She wasn't just the girl who had been heartbroken. She was someone stronger, someone who had rebuilt her life from the ground up. She whispered, "This is who I am now." Her reflection smiled back at her, not because she had all the answers, but because she was okay with not knowing. She had learned that closure didn't always come from another person. Sometimes it came from within. "I'm enough," she said again, the words feeling truer now than ever before. And maybe the last goodbye was just the beginning of something beautiful.